Hello, and thank you for tuning in to the Flatirons Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. This show is brought to you by Flatirons Tuning, your source for any aftermarket or OEM Subaru parts. Be sure to check out our store at flatironstuning.com and stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning. Welcome back to the Flatirons Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. This is episode number 51. And on this episode, we got Scotty at the shop, Tasso and from OTC Racing, and Nigel's in the shop here as well as myself. And for this episode, I've been thinking of a question because it's pretty relevant to like the last couple of conversations that we've had, is like how to utilize your off season, that sort of thing, which is then how do you utilize your budget? How do you make your budget? How do you make sure that you're using it properly to do what you want to do? Like sometimes that's getting the car back together, getting the car so it's running in. Sometimes it's going to events. Sometimes it's making the car faster. But there's a lot of facets to that. And so I wanted to just kind of throw that question out there and have a conversation about it. So I know, Tasso, you're really excited about talking about budget because it's maybe close to home at this point.
Love talking about money. Yeah.
Yes. Well, and I mean, in some to certain circumstance, your situation is one of the things that made me think about it, just from the standpoint that you have a failure, so your car right now has a need. So one of the first parts of that is, if your car has something that it imminently needs, you want to make sure that you're putting your budget towards that. Like I'm guessing you're not looking at brake setups or suspension or new wheels and tires at this point, because that is not nearly as important as getting the car running again.
That'd be the smart thing.
It doesn't mean you're not looking at it.
Yeah, right. Exactly. That's the smart move, is not to put your cart before the horse here a little bit. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't looking at aerodynamic stuff and weight saving stuff right now.
Sure.
Just completely ignoring my problems. Because eventually I think it'll just heal if I give it enough time.
Enough JB Weld and you can fix anything.
Not even. That's too much work. I don't feel like mixing up JB Weld right now. So
time heals all wounds.
What's that?
Time heals all wounds.
Yeah, that's exactly. Right. So, yes, you're right. The first money that goes into the car this off season will be to repair what's broken. But that doesn't mean that, like any kid on Halloween, I'm not thinking about the good stuff first before I gotta put in the groundwork to get there in the first place.
Well, and if you're kind of waiting for the coffers to fill up before you fix the transmission, because that's going to be a larger expense. But yeah, I mean, certainly if you're just waiting for more paychecks to land, there's no harm in looking around. The trick is you don't want to like get so distracted by that you all of a sudden add like other things or start buying or ordering other things without having the funds ready to fix the imminent need of the car.
Right. And that's a lot of the budgeting and the expenses that I have for the car are I don't know how to say this. Like they're time expenses, time budgets that I put into the car. So at some point at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how much DIY you do or what, like I'm going to have to buy metal parts to put back in that transmission. And that's just the name of the game. Yeah. But a lot of the budgeting I'll do in a sense in this off season is budgeting time to do stuff like, get weight off the car or move weight around to better places or work on some aero pieces. Because even the aero stuff I do, I'm not the guy that like goes off and buys a, $10,000 carbon wing from the UK or something like that. I'll go get $20 of McMaster car aluminum, and some plastic I have laying around and do some stuff. But so yeah, there's some of that stuff. I'm thinking what's on my mind right now is watching Dave Kern at Temple Canyon, the last race I was at. It was really kind of dry and dusty, and he had these big old obnoxious, winglets like canards on his front bumper, because he actually stole the front bumper from one of his Pikes Peak Evos.
Yeah. And
I could just see with all the extra dust that was there, just like this vortex rolling off of both of those winglets going down the side of the car. And I can't. I used to have canards until they got shredded, and now I'm going to have to make some more. So that right now is what I'm planning, and I'm completely ignoring the things I should be doing because whatever.
Right.
Well, I mean,
Sure.
besides money, there's nothing really to plan for, right? It's like save up till you get a wad, and
Yeah.
then you blow it all. Here, fix
Right.
this,
Yep.
and then you're back
Phrasing?
to
Yes.
Well-
Try to have like $100 left over to make those canards, and then
Yeah.
you're ready to go.
Oh, $100. I'm not buying these things. I'm making them.
All right, $50.
These going to be $20 canards,
All right.
$15 canards.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, no, I hate budget stuff because it's trying to be an adult, and I just don't want to be an adult. Ever.
Uh-huh.
When I threw this idea out or this question out to the guys, like that's one of the things is like this is not a fun topic necessarily, and this is not something that like it's not the thing that is like, oh, everybody's going to click that because it's going to be like cool shiny things, but it's like this is the real nuts and bolts of like if you really want to go out and compete with a car, and especially if you want to string together a series of events. I mean, on some degree you're going to have to deal with budget. And then there's a lot more facets to it than maybe you would know going into it. And so that brings me to you, Nigel. So let's talk about your experience when you went out to run your first season of Grid Life there.
So in terms of like car reliability, it was a pretty successful season. And I still went over my budget by triple.
Right.
So like we had planned, I had no idea going into like what a season would look like, how expensive anything would be. I was like, okay, this is vaguely what I'm going to spend on consumables. Here's what I expect to spend on like tires and brakes throughout the year and like oil changes and all that stuff, like my normal consumable expenses. And then my dad hooked it up and was like, hey, I've got like 1,000,000 points of whatever hotel. So when you go to Grid Life, you've got your hotels completely covered. So paid zero for hotels for an entire season. And then with a mechanically reliable car and what I thought was like reasonable budget for consumables and expenses and like food, travel stuff, I budgeted for like what I thought I was going to get for gas and like economy towing a car across the country. Like I didn't go into this like, yeah, $40, that'll be great for like a weekend of getting across the country and back. That's fine. No, like I actually like tried to do some research on it. And we ended up, spending 3 times more than I thought I was going to spend in the season, even without like entry fees and stuff, just on
Like fuel.
Yeah. So fuel to get, I had to skip an event because I couldn't afford the gas to get me there and back. So I essentially lost the cost of the entry fee, but that was like so much less of a hit than it would have been to try and go to the event that I was just like, that's fine.
And if you've never really towed long distances before, and then you start doing that, I mean, it can be an eye opener. And that's to a certain extent. I mean, that's one of the killers in the rally community right now is you've got these events that are on the East Coast and these events that are on the West Coast, and they're that's the whole season. It's East Coast and West Coast, and that even if you're in the middle, that's a heck of a lot of driving to hit a lot of these events.
Well, it earned the nickname of a tow championship, not a rally championship.
Yeah.
And that's why a lot of the Grid Life events are all like in the Midwest. It was weird because there was only a couple events that people came further than Colorado to any of the events in the Midwest. Like a bunch of people, myself included, didn't go to Atlanta because they were like, this is too far. I know people that were in Illinois and couldn't make it to Atlanta. So they were like, yeah, we'll go to Audubon. That's like our local track. And we'll go to, Gingerman. It's close. And that was as far as they would go. They didn't come out here to Colorado. They didn't make that trek. And we're out here in Colorado trying to make that 5 times in a year.
Yeah.
Have any of you guys ever tried to like solicit support or sponsorship from a fuel company? I was just thinking about this. Like, people have been racing all over this country for a long time. And it's not like, whatever. I mean, gas is more expensive, but you used to see like, Gulf and Shell and stuff like that all over race cars. And I'm thinking now of just like one YouTuber in particular has sponsorship from like Love's Travel Stop or something like that. And he's pulling a big toter home and stuff like that too. Just, you guys ever thought about that, just to try and make a fun segue in this podcast a little bit and talk about ridiculous race car stuff?
I don't know. I mean, there's fuel sponsors for certain events, but that's usually like Sunoco or VP.
Yeah,
But
right.
that
I've
doesn't
thought
really.
about it. I mean, like I have a sponsorship package that I put together, like it's a little printed out PDF of like all the kind of stuff that you would need to apply for a sponsorship. And I'm just like too scared to do anything with it. I've tried like two places and both of them, like it didn't really go that far. Didn't really get what I wanted out of it. I made like, I don't know, a half dozen, never submitted them or never done anything with it because I'm like, I don't want it to go bad. And I don't know why I have that like apprehension, because what's going to happen? They're going to say no or not reply. Okay.
Well, that's a tough thing too. Like it's just a fact of soliciting sponsorship. At some point of the day is you're going to get a lot of negative responses, and that's something that I agree with you. It sucks. I've had to kind of like try and steel myself against it a little bit. But it sucks when someone says, I've had it from companies that even then have like gone on to repost my videos and stuff. It's like, oh, what? So you like the media now, but you didn't like you didn't want to make this official kind of thing. But it's just, it's kind of a bitter part of the whole process. But
I think the more that you do that, the more comfortable you're going to be with it. And if you really want to earn sponsorship, I mean, that is part of it. But to your point too, Nigel, is like the more like success, the more events, the more things you can point to that you've done, the greater your likelihood of getting it. Of course, the irony is the more that you've done and shown that you don't need the sponsorship, the more likely you are to be able to get the sponsorship.
It doesn't work that way with girls though. It's kind of like this whole thing, putting yourself out there, right? And you're getting shut down a bunch of times. And too bad you can't just be like, hey, look at all these other girls I've had. And then be like, oh, sure, I'm all about it. Let's do this. No.
Oh, man.
It doesn't work that way.
No. Well, and there's another aspect to this that I want to make sure that we talk about, Nigel, which is, so in the middle of your season, you also then did a testing event that was put on by 3R, local shop. And so I want to make sure that we talk about some of the things that brought home to you.
Sure. So getting back to like the budget side of things, like, as I realized pretty quickly that I was going to be spending a lot more money to go racing for a full season than I had originally anticipated, like I wanted to make sure I was spending my money on good things and not like wasting it on stuff I didn't need. So the car was reliable. I wasn't touching the car. I wasn't going to spend any money where it didn't need to be spent. I had one set of wheels and tires and then a set of like rain, basically wheels and tires. And then when those tires went, that was it. So then I decided I was going to do these 3R testing days. It was a driver and car development day. And they were pretty expensive. It was not like a normal test and tune day at the track where it's like $120 and you get a day at the track. It was like, I don't know, $700-800 to go to the track for a day. There were a maximum of 8 cars. And on a normal track day, you have a maximum, I think, of 3 hours that you could be on track between all the sessions and the lunch break and stuff. I think we had the track for like 9.5 hours, and it was just, how much fuel did you bring? And that was your limitation. There were no run groups. There was nothing to stop you from just running. And so you go out and run like 3 tanks of gas, just like as long as you can go. And the seat time was super valuable. I mean, way better than a track day. And just the seat time alone probably would have been worth the money to me. But then like the driver instruction and then the kind of support I found at the track and the car development side of things that was part of this package just made this like pretty much invaluable to me, where like I was happy to skip the Road Atlanta event knowing that I, spent that money that would have gotten me to Atlanta on a local track, but with way better seat time and way better support and way better like almost networking in a sense. Like you meet people there that are doing the same thing as you, and you meet like the 3R, you meet with them. It's such a huge like benefit to doing that instead of going racing for less than an hour of track time for a $500 event entry fee plus there and back. I spent half as much to get hours of seat time and instruction
and data. I mean, that's the other key
Oh
thing.
yeah.
Is like you all of a sudden you get a lot better idea of, okay, well, what tire pressures are you running that are work, or how can you optimize that? What does the car feel like when you've got the optimal tire pressure? What about suspension setup? You spent a lot of money to develop the car, but in doing so, you learned a lot of the pieces of the puzzle to get the car set up right to work better and to be faster.
I know it's a little bit of like a semantic or something, but it's kind of the difference between just spending money and then using money for improvement too,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Like this, you can go out and do your $120 track day and go around and just really solidify your bad habits and really wear out tires unevenly or shred brakes that aren't adjusted or something, whatever, just keep beating your head into the wall trying to figure out handling problems that you're just never going to figure out without any kind of help. Or you can go out there to an event like this, spend a little bit more money, but get tenfold that amount back. And that's a smart part about budgeting for the year, because it's not only seat time, it's not only doing an event like that, it's also when it comes to improvements in the car. And it's something Flatirons has talked about a bunch with like an upgrade track for your car or an upgrade path or smart improvements before the fun ones.
Yeah.
And it's at the point even where, like, for my own car, I have a list of things I need to get done before I go racing, things that I should get done to help, and then things I just kind of want that are not good money spending on, and then other things that are just spending money. And so it's, like, I need to fix this transmission. I want to have sick ass canards on my front bumper because it makes for cool dust. But is that really all that useful? Yeah, it's more useful than if I got like 8-ball valve caps or something like that, right?
Or
And then
really
it's just
cool air
spending
horn.
money.
Yeah.
Or really cool like train horns or something like that. But
Yeah.
so that's
My
cool.
budget also has 3 tiers to it. Like the needs, the probably needs, and the wants.
Yeah.
And
Well,
like it changes too if you're going to like one event versus here's what I want to do for a season, or like here's what I want to do to get the car running again. That all of those kind of categories change, and like the amount of money that I'm willing to spend on something to get the car running is a lot different than the amount of money I'm willing to spend to go race a season, and those needs are going to be very different.
Well, and I think the key thing there that you learned by doing this testing day and seeing what the improvements were, because I'm sure that you and the car, the next event that you did go to, were much faster and you had a much clearer picture of the things to do, the things to look at, like tire pressures, tire temperatures, car temperatures, et cetera, when you went to the next event after having all of that data download, because you now have that experience. And so that in some ways makes that an invaluable experience. But like if you're just coming in fresh to running a season, I mean, probably the focus is just making the events or making the season. I'm trying to string this 5-event season together. That's the priority. That's where all the money and energy is going. Versus like, well, wait a minute. If I get in halfway, maybe I should look at some of the issues that the car is having, or why am I 5 seconds off the pace of anybody else in my class? Like maybe there, it's worth keeping in mind. Like if you get halfway through a season and you have some of these like really big like things that might well need attention, it's worth spending the time and possibly some of the budget to fix those needs, to get the car to either run better, be more reliable, be faster, versus completing the whole season.
It depends on your budget and your goal, I think. If you're already like super tight on the end of your budget and you're like scraping by to make it to every event, maybe upgrades in the middle of the season aren't necessary. But if you're doing good on budget and your goal is to take a look at the car and think like, okay, I'm mid-pack. If I do these couple changes here and there that are valuable in lap time because of the things I've noticed with the amount of seat time I have, that this small upgrade is going to be valuable for a lap time gain, maybe that would make more sense and I can be fighting for podiums or even wins or something. For me, my whole season budget was don't touch the car unless you absolutely need to. Get out and run, get seat time, make it to every event. My goal was to experience all the different tracks that I could. My goal was never to be competitive. It was to go enjoy an experience, right? So my
get
budget
to the event
was,
versus be competitive.
Yeah, my budget was geared around making it there and running there and having a reliable car while I was there. So there were only 2 sessions that I didn't complete fully in the entirety of the grid life season that I ran. One of them was I put the car in the wall in mid-Ohio. The other one was I melted the washer bottle because my intercooler piping shook itself loose and melted the windshield washer fluid just from friction.
What are your IATs? Oh, okay.
It wasn't hot. It just literally rubbed an intercooler pipe shaped burn hole into the bottle.
Yeah.
And I came in from that session. Those are the only 2 things that happened during the season. The first one led to me buying a big brake kit to not have a brake failure and hit the wall again. Cool. Okay. That was a huge chunk of my budget that I was not intending to spend, but it was massively worthwhile for what it meant for the rest of the season. And to this day, I still run that brake kit.
From a reliability standpoint, if nothing else.
Yeah, exactly. And consumables, brake pad costs went up, but my brake pads lasted me the whole rest of the season. It was the first event, right? So it worked into my budget where I took out costs for other things. I wasn't doing rotors and pads as often as I was expecting to.
Well, and part of that, I mean, this is another consideration that I think is worth having a discussion about. How do you prioritize reliability versus speed or competitiveness? And I think that the smaller that the budget is, you kind of have to prioritize reliability over everything else, because if the car is not reliable and or you can't make events, then that's it.
Or you just make sacrifices in the number of events, right? It's the same, the 3-pointed whatever, time,
fast,
money,
fast,
or
cheap,
speed,
reliable.
Whatever, right? So I go for fast and cheap, because unlike Nigel, my goal isn't to make as many events as I can. There's 2 events I want to try and make sure I make, with Temple and Land's End, because they're both really fun roads, and Land's End kind of because of the prestige and history of the event. But I don't care if I only make 3 out of 5 events on a season, like I did this last season, and I win, then that's still a successful season for me. Because that's my priority. That's what I prioritized.
Sure. Well, and to that extent too, I mean, from that reliability standpoint, a lot of times you don't know what you don't know. For you, Nigel, with your brakes, as you get rolling, you find out it really pays dividends to have a motorsports brake kit versus a stock brake caliper and a pad. That's money well spent. And once you've done that, all of a sudden now the reliability of the brakes goes way up. And then that's not something that's going to continue to eat away at your budget, cause a really large increase in your consumables cost. But as you go on, Tasso, you find how you can optimize those 2 or 3 events that you're consistently able to make, and all of a sudden, hopefully you'll get to the point where you've got the package sorted out enough that all of a sudden now the whole season kind of falls into place, because you've addressed all of these reliability things, and now it's way more feasible to do the whole season and be competitive.
That's true. And where that has manifested itself already is motor builds, right? So I have a much more expensive motor, even though I'm doing it cheaply in spare parts, and I'm not going and buying an off the shelf stage 420 block or something like that. But it's still, I've spent a little bit more money there, similar to your big brake kit, because it's saving me money in the long run. Where now, I have a motor that's lasted 2 seasons, and who knows if it was 5 seconds away from blowing up. But it's already made those 2 seasons, which is pretty good in my book. And so it's a place where that has already manifested, where I found some weak points. Like I'm building a motor with parts that you'd think like, geez, what is this guy making? 800 horsepower or something like that. Still whatever, semi-closed or whatever. But the point is, it's way overbuilt because it costs a little bit more, but it's saving me money. And so now, I'm going to put bigger U-joints in my drive shaft. And then, I would have made 4 out of 5 if I didn't have a small U-joint. So You're right. It's a ratchet of finding those things and then optimizing your, money spent for event made ratio.
Yeah. Well, and so Tasso, I wanted to ask you too, like in terms of testing. Like I remember, I think was it Land's End where you used the hard pack rally tires?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this is a rally tire that is designed for like really hard packed dirt. Which honestly, until you said you found them over, I think, Ireland is where you found them?
Yeah, the UK somewhere.
UK and have them shipped
to
in.
Ireland and the greater British Isles.
Yeah. But I had never heard of this type of rally tire. And then they landed and like, well, this is kind of cool. But like doing the research, but then getting that tire, because you'd run them before. Like you ordered in, I think, 2 new ones. No?
I had them before, but I never had a chance to run them because the motor blew up before that event 2 years ago. But I knew from other people's experience with those tires that they would be fast in those conditions, assuming the road got to those conditions. So it's to Yokohama, I don't know, AO36 or something like that. They call, I think at one point it was nicknamed the Acropolis Rally Tire, or it's really good on like broken asphalt or really hard packed dirt. And so for the folks that don't know dirt racing, blue groove is when dirt gets so like the loose stuff gets so polished off, you start even depositing rubber on top of hard packed dirt, and so it grips 8/10 as well as asphalt does. And still you have potential for pebbles here and there. You get offline, you don't want to be just completely hosed. So switching to that tire was it was a calculated risk, but it was pretty well calculated at that point. And it helped that they're like 2/3 the cost of the normal tires I run too. So I didn't feel too bad, getting them. That was part of the calculation for this, was not only speed wise, but budget wise. Yeah, I can, because I only have, this is going to sound like what only, but I only have 12 wheels for that car. And in my event, it's not uncommon to, bubble a sidewall or blow a bead or flat a tire somehow. I sort of expect to, go through 1 or 2 tires in an event just with damage.
Yeah.
So it's not like I can just get 4 of those tires and bring them to the event. It's kind of like I have to bring 6 in case, right? And so that gets factored into the budget too. And then it's, well, okay, but what if it doesn't blue groove? Do I hose myself by not bringing enough sets of gravel tires to be competitive in that? And so it did. I didn't have either the wheels or the budget to be fully competitive in both kind of like traction eventualities. So I just, made my move and shot my shot and went for the blue groove option, and it paid off because the road, like a couple of days beforehand, somebody went out there to look at the road and took a picture, and there was so much mag chloride down that I even like texted the person and asked, is that the lower part where it's paved? They're like, no, man, that's race course. There was so much mag chloride down, it looked like asphalt. So I felt pretty good, as I was driving there. But, at that point, it was already way too late to get tires to go the gravel route if it looked like it was going to stay loose. So that's, to talk about budgets and stuff like that, that's part of that, making sacrifices where I was going to be slow if it stayed gravel because I didn't have a good set and a couple good sets of nice sharp gravel tires.
But you had enough experience from previously running the event that it had a tendency to get blue grooved. And then you found these tires that would be optimal if it did that, which you've seen it do before. And then you were fortunate enough to know, like going into the event, like, okay, man, this looks like this is going to be the conditions.
Yeah.
And then those tires ended up being the difference. So you have to kind of do the research and then have a little bit of experience. And then all of a sudden you can find these little things that like now you can utilize or put together. And that makes the difference to get you on the podium or be faster than if you wouldn't have had those tires.
Which is why we've talked about in the past, the real value in a brick and mortar speed shop, like Flatirons Tuning, is not in the parts, right? You can go get parts all over the place, but buying them from you guys, not to just sit here and stroke your ego, but buying them from you guys, where I'm looking at 3 people in front of me on the screen that have all driven their car on the track. 2 you guys, I think, are real competitive time tackers. No offense, John, but you need to get your car out more often.
None taken. That's fair. It's totally fair.
But I mean, so that's having that experience to draw from. Like, you're not just paying for parts when you go get parts at Flatirons. You're paying for, what all you guys have done to figure out where the smart money goes in that thing. So not only is that smarter using the budget that you do have to buy good parts or parts that are researched, but you're also buying into a knowledge pool where you're not having to spend, and admittedly, you're not going to give them all $700 or $800 of your knowledge from your 3-hour testing day, but you're going to go, hey man, have you thought about this? So maybe they're buying something from you, but they're getting $100 extra worth of knowledge that goes along with that. So
yeah, information is incredibly valuable, especially as you get in and you start doing something and you learn what works and what doesn't. That's incredibly valuable. And that's why we do this podcast. That's why we make the videos that we make, is we realize, well, the better we can be at providing the information that customers or people, competitors might need to be more effective or to have a better time, to be faster, to put together a better car, to make their car more reliable. Hopefully the long term, like that, they will appreciate the value of that information, and that's what brings them back to find out what other tricks we've got up our sleeve or what other experiences we've had that might be relevant to them. I mean, a lot of the rally guys that we've sponsored, like Jeff Huser, Dave Brown, especially at the beginning, I spent a few hours with both of those guys just kind of going through, like, this is what we've done, this is what we learned. Like, a lot of those guys, kind of spoilers, I guess, for the next question of the week, related to differentials, because we played around a lot with differentials with the rally car and realized how key a piece of the puzzle a good functioning front and rear and center differential were to make a rally car fast. And I think that made a good improvement for both of those guys, for instance. But that was having a conversation and being able to share our experience and point them in the right direction to, like, really get them moving in the right way, and spending that budget in a way, like, if you have a couple $1,000s where you have the option to put these differentials in your car, it really makes a difference. It makes you faster, versus like just spending on power or something that's more misplaced, that's not going to give you that benefit.
And you can have an expectation at that point. And so then if you don't, I'll tie this into a story here. If you don't see the results of that expectation matching what you were expecting, then it's time to start parsing that apart and figuring out what's going on.
Sure.
And so the story I'll tie that in with is, I'll keep it short, about those tires. Also, what we did are 2 runs on the beginning of Saturday, and we were kind of working our way down in time, and we switched. We're like, I think the road is there. I think it's, swept enough to support these tires. Let's switch to them. And then there's a whiteboard, timing board at the hill climbs. And we look back and I was like, man, that run felt faster. And we don't have any way to really know this until we go back down, look at the whiteboard. And so I'm sitting there and our time was like 2 seconds slower on the whiteboard, having switched to those tires. And so I'm there and I'm even talking with Reese Millen about this. He's like, dude, did you go to the intermediates? So I was like, yeah, but I think I went slower. Like, it felt way faster. And it's something you guys have all felt too, right? Where it's like the run or the lap that you think is your fast lap never is. And so often it's the one where it's like, wow, there's no way that one. But then it ends up being kind of fastest,
Yep.
And so suddenly I'm sitting there with Reese and we're looking over a video. We're like, I don't know, man, this should be faster. Like, what's going on here? And it wasn't until the next day where we had the official printout. It turns out the run was actually faster. And it was just someone just miswrote on the whiteboard And so actually we did pick up a handful of seconds.
Oh, wow.
But because there was research and expectation behind what should have had happened, because I had some experience in the seat of my pants for feeling like what a run, and we all get surprised, but we have a feeling like, I don't know, this one isn't jiving with what I know. Then it could start to work. We were starting to work backwards from this isn't the expectation, or this isn't the result that I expected.
Mhm.
So where does this fit into? And I am whatever I am, just a little amateur, go-getter. But Reese Millen is a longtime professional race car driver, and he's trying to pick back through his, mental slides. Like, maybe you
Was
just,
there a bad section of the road? Did something
if
else
you're a little
happen?
bit offline, you just wallow in the loose stuff, and that's not worth it. Like it's, but so it's that, I don't know, to compound, to multiply the ability of your budget. Having experience to draw from is probably one of the biggest budget multipliers that's there.
Well, and so I wanted to tie another facet into this conversation because it's something that we've had a lot of discussions about here. Scotty would say probably way too many, but here we are. And that is about whatever the next step is to do with our Pikes Peak car. So this is in regards to like once you've got this foundation of experience built up and you want to look to the next level, like how do you take the car to the next level? Where do you find that next chunk of speed? What is the low-hanging fruit? For us with the Pikes Peak car, what we're looking at in the balance, or what we're trying to strike a balance between is, do we build for more power? Do we do an engine build? Because again, at this point, the engine is still 100% stock sharp block, stock heads, stock cams, everything. But then the other thing that we've had a lot of discussions about is putting in a sequential transmission. And there's a myriad of reasons for doing that. But then it's like, so we had this discussion again this season after we've got the engine to the point where we feel like it's pretty reliable. We've dealt with a lot of issues to get the engine to where it is now. It's like it seems like the drivetrain is going to be the next focus. But making the jump to a sequential is an expensive jump because it's not even just putting in a sequential. It's on top of that. So just a little background here. So sequential, the idea here is that the transmission would be set up so that you just have, the lever you push up, shifts up, you pull back, it shifts down. And ideally, the driver can keep his foot flat on the floor with the throttle so that basically you hit that upshift. And then you have this logic in the ECU to do what it needs to do to like pull spark or fuel or whatever to unload the transmission so that it can make that shift. And for a turbocharged car, there's a huge benefit in that because, with the turbo, every time you close the throttle, that's where your bypass valve opens. If you've got, say, 15 or 20 pounds of pressure built up in your intake system and the intercooler and so forth, you close the throttle plate, then that bypass valve opens, all the pressure is released. Now that helps facilitate you making the shift under normal circumstances, but then you roll back onto the throttle, you have to build all that pressure up again. There's this lag. You have to basically get the boost pressure up again. You have to get the torque up again, and then the car starts to accelerate. With a sequential, if it's working right, you just hit that shift. There's a momentary blip. None of the pressure is released, and then you come right back on to full power with that upshift, and then away you go. So with a turbocharged car, it can be a really significant benefit. Plus, then there's the reduction in time between shifts, so that you're not losing like a 2 or 3 tenths of a second as you're shifting gears. Maybe it's only a tenth or less. But to get all that to work, you have to have a computer that can do what it needs to do to facilitate that shift, which pretty much means going with a standalone. So even just the little step of, well, it's not a little step, but the thought of a little step of putting in a sequential transmission also means putting in a standalone ECU that has the ability to control the engine to facilitate and to get the information from the transmission so that it even knows that you're making a shift, like a pressure switch, to make that all work. So that's involved, and it's expensive on both counts. And so that's something that we've been juggling with, but we're kind of to the point where we think that it's worth making that step. But then when we had the discussion of, well, do we want to do that and an engine build at the same time? Where we're at currently is no. We're going to focus on the transmission and get that to work. because that's
this,
like this.
This
Go ahead.
car's already fast enough.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't matter that we're running a stock motor. The car is built well. It handles well. The fact of the matter is there's 146 corners on Pikes Peak. And what 156 corners on Pikes Peak. What John was talking about is, every time you come into one of those corners and you have to downshift in a regular H pattern, you lose all your boost. And these are like second, sometimes or third, sometimes second gear corners. And, of course, the bigger turbo you're running, the more lag you're going to have. And just the ability, honestly, we need anti-lag too, but we don't need to go down that road right now.
Yeah.
But just, having the sequential, just to get us out of those corners, make sure we're always in a power band, and the boost is always going to be there throughout those gears. It is going to be huge. I'm pretty sure that there's probably 20 seconds, maybe more, in just a sequential.
With the same power level, just having that ability to shift the transmission that way.
Exact same car, exactly how it is with the sequential. But the problem is that budget, and it's not cheap. Every single one of us here would love to have a sequential in their car, but it's pretty much the price of another car.
Yeah.
Significantly more than. Yeah.
Well, and so just to hit that point, Scotty. So like that's kind of our conclusion is there's maybe 20 to 30 seconds just by putting a sequential in the car on Pikes Peak with the car as it sits now. And as expensive as the sequential is, like if we were to not do that and instead try and make like 100 or 200 more horsepower, the guess is that increase in power, it would not be as easy to gain that much time because of all the complexities of what would change in the engine to make that extra power in the environment of Pikes Peak, specifically all these low speed corners, like how tight, how many low speed corners there are back to back to back, especially in the middle section. Like, okay, you make 600 horsepower, that's great. But now like the car is a complete dog in the whole middle section. This is actually a problem that we dealt with initially in the first couple of years that we ran.
With the bigger twin scroll turbo. Yeah.
Yeah. We were losing 30 seconds to a lot of our competitors in the middle section because we didn't have usable power. So even if we increase our peak power, we're probably going to put ourselves, or it would be easy to put ourselves back in that situation where we're now like, we have a car that's just not set up for that middle technical section and to lose time. And like an engine build is to really go through and do everything and address, everything from pistons, rods, cylinder heads, cams, you name it. That's a big investment too.
So what we got quoted like $23,000 for a motorsport grade long block for this car.
Yeah,
and
20 to 25. Yeah.
Okay, and then you think about that. All right, if we're going to do this, we may as well have a spare. So now we're at 50,000 to make sure that the motor, like if something happens during race week and we need to change it out for the actual race.
Yeah, to optimize the engine, we were looking at doing some really kind of out of the box stuff to the engine, which would mean that like there's no readily available spare parts. So it's like, okay, well, if you're going to do this out of the block short block, you really should probably have two, one in the car and at least a short block sitting on the side, so that if you have just a simple failure, you can put in the other short block. Because, again, for an event like with Pikes Peak, what's tricky about it is the season is 1 week and it's really just one race. But if you build everything to make this one event and then you have a failure in the first day or two, geez, how much have you invested just in entry fees and to get everything lined up to make that event? And then do you just throw in the towel for the event, or do you try and cobble something together to be able to run? And the more custom the car is, the harder that is. Could be.
You talk about budget. Entry fee for Pikes Peak this year is $2,750. And that's just for the entry fee. If you don't get accepted, they refund that money. Okay, so that's $2,700 just to enter. That's not counting the other $1,000 per day for any of the practice days that you want to do. Yep. Race week is essentially covered during that, and that covers your race. But then your budget for your tires and spares and everything else that goes into that, that's a lot of money to budget.
And fuel and hotels. It's not a stretch to say it's like a Pikes Peak race week at a bare minimum just for consumables, entry fees, and then maybe a couple days of tire testing before the actual race week, you're looking at investing, say, $10,000, just roughly.
Jeez.
You know,
That's incredible.
yeah. So it's like if you're gonna have the budget to do this event, and that's just the cost of the event, well, you've got to do your diligence leading up to the event to make sure you can get through and actually run too.
Mhm.
That's and with the sequential, the other thing is like consumables cost. And so like Nigel, you talked about the consumables and that being something that as you started running, you didn't have maybe as clear a picture what those consumables costs would be. So and I guess just to clearly define it, what we talk about with consumables is stuff like things that as you drive, you're just going to be using up: brake pads, tires, fuel, the things that you're just going to be going through is a normal course of driving an event or driving at the track. There's a cost to all those things. And it's like, okay, I want to do 5 events this year. Well, if it's $100 entry fee, to get on, or 5 track days even, so it's $150 per track day. But in your consumables cost between tires and fuel, you're spending, say, $400. Well, you've got to add that together. So it's like the entry fee plus the consumables. That's the minimum cost of running the car at the track.
So let's be more realistic here. Just the local events with NASA Rocky Mountain, say 8 to 10 events per season at $400 to $600 per event. So I mean, the thousands of dollars just in entry fees. That's not taking into account the budget for your tires.
And tires, yeah.
I mean, tires, if you really want to be competitive, you want a brand new set of tires. I mean, at least a few times a year. That's $1,600 to $2,000, depending on, the size of tire and exactly what brand you're running. So, I mean, so $5,000 in entry fees plus, let's say, $5,000 to $6,000 in tires for a season. I mean, that's just huge. You spend basically that budget on one race for Pikes Peak.
Yeah.
Well, if you want to do anything else and Pikes Peak, I mean, you better marry rich.
Well, and that's where the sequential, that's the other kicker that we've really struggled with is like, okay, well, we know that this is a way we could definitely be faster, but you're basically taking kind of like a quartz Casio watch that costs like $30 and you're replacing it with this fine mechanical piece that costs way more, like 10 times as much, but it's also a lot more finicky, or could be more finicky. So if we put in the sequential, the other possibility, actually likely circumstances, that now the transmission is going to be have to be factored in a little bit to those consumables costs. Because with all these different mechanical workings, it's something where there's actually a teardown interval. There's the oil change interval is basically every event. I think it's like every 2 or 3 hours you're supposed to change the fluid, and you're supposed to use good fluid for obvious reasons. And it's complicated. And so kind of like what we said with the engine, okay, well, if we're going to go out of the box with the engine, we need to have a spare. Well, if we're going to go completely out of the box with the transmission for a Pikes Peak race week, we should probably at least have a complete separate set of the sequential mechanism. So basically all of the parts that make the sequential transmission,
the gear stack,
and the shifters and everything set aside. So if we have some kind of a failure, we've got the parts so that we at least have a fighting shot at putting the transmission back together so that we can continue running. I mean, I guess we do have a spare transmission, so we could also just put in a standard transmission. But then if we're thinking we're going to save 20 seconds with the sequential, something happens, you put the stacked transmission in, it's like, well, I guess we just lost that 20 seconds. And do we just come back next year? So which would cost more, losing a whole year where we have a shot at being 20 seconds faster, or having a second set of everything that we need to rebuild the transmission? That's all of a sudden a calculation that we have to make.
That's why your goals factor so much into your budget. That's why if Tasso goes out to win, he chooses the events that he wants to actually be sure he has a fighting shot to win at. He doesn't pick 6, 7 events out of the year and be like, I should be able to win one of these. he's, that's not how his goals work. And if your goal is to go 20 seconds faster at Pikes Peak and knock down a time, you have to budget to make that goal.
Yeah.
If you're shoestringing everything together, it's going to be a lot tougher to make that goal the higher it is.
It becomes a lot more, chance becomes a lot more of a factor, because like, well, if everything goes right and we don't break anything, then it's going to be great. But it's like, and then the other thing too is it's like all of a sudden taking the car to the track to run it is something that has to be maybe considered in a different way or weighed in a different way. Because like maybe if we still keep the standard transmission, maybe for some of the testing, we put the standard transmission back in the car so that we're not risking the sequential as we're doing some basic testing. I'm not saying to do it, Scotty.
Then how do you get faster? How do you learn how to actually use the sequential if you're not running it?
Well, and I would say it depends on what you're testing.
You have kind of a convergence of two, one well-known kind of scale in motorsports, which is where as you kind of ratchet up, the cost for each second of improvement becomes more and more expensive, right? Like, so to go from, a stock, whatever, front wheel drive street car at a track, to make that 10 seconds faster is nothing, but to make a Formula One car 10 seconds faster is $2 billion. Where you have that rate of kind of diminishing return on investment. It's not only you have that scale with at the tippy top of speed, but you also have with Pikes Peak the parallel kind of, because it's a one shot annually, you have a just rapidly increasing cost because it's just a one event. Where if you're trying to make 30 events, you're not going to sweat too much about bringing a crazy spares package with 3 spare cars because you only have one day to make it happen. You're just going to fix it for the next event because you got 19 more chances.
Right. So
you have two compounding scales of rapidly runaway costs kind of stuff going on there.
Well, and it's even for something like time attack. I mean, so we're going to try. Well, the plan is to bring the Pikes Peak car out to Grid Life at COTA for Super Lap Battle this coming February.
That's not Grid Life.
Global.
There you go.
To me, they're interchangeable, even though they're not. In my
it's
brain,
all just asphalt racing, so it doesn't matter.
I'm just going to start calling it Global Grid Life.
There you
Time
go.
Attack.
Mm-hmm.
Global Life.
NASCAR
but it's like,
or something.
So if we can figure the sequential thing out, I mean, it will be beneficial if we start doing time attack events. It's going to be beneficial everywhere. It's just like the specific goal for the car is Pikes Peak because that's what we built it to do before. But it would be beneficial everywhere, or at least it should be. And so it's one of those things. Like, this is one of the reasons I think that we're getting ready to go down this path, is because it is beneficial everywhere. It's not something that's only going to be a benefit at Pikes Peak, and then it's something that is not as helpful anywhere else. And so it really will further the development of the car. And then also knowing that we have a lot to learn to figure out how to run the sequential and keep it reliable. If we can get through that and find the way to do that, then that's going to be really reliable or really helpful, so that we can, like, if we start doing, say, 3, 4, 5 events with the car in a season, we know what to look for. We know, what the spares package is going to be, and just, to the topic at hand, we know kind of what to budget, or we'll have a better idea once we do it a few times, what to budget and what the expenses will likely be.
Yeah. So you added a whole other category to my budget, and that's all right. And I'll throw like a sequential in there. Because someday someone will go, hey, you want a sequential? And I'll go, yeah, all right.
Well,
but
it's like
that day, it's not that.
Right. Well, and see, the another reason that it's really come, like, we talked about this kind of earlier on, and just the expense was so high. It was just like, no, it's ridiculous. We can't do that. But now there's so many cars that are coming with these dual clutches. I mean, so to your end there, Tasso, I mean, so the guys at Saltus, Steve Biss, I mean, they were working on a Gulf 4 rally car that has the dual clutch transmission built in. And I remember talking to him about it initially, and I was like, man, it's just cheating. It's like, no, the car comes with it. I know the car comes with it, I said, but it's still cheating because we don't, and a lot of the other cars don't. And it's just, there's such this disparity between the cars that do have it, the cars that don't. And then it's like you're buying the whole car again to put this kind of sequential shift mechanism in it just to get back up onto a level playing field.
I mean, there's no doubt they're great. And it's, I think, something we haven't even really talked about, not to just also harp on sequential so much, is they add so much consistency to a run, and they take away so much driver error and driver fatigue. That is, as much as anything, you get 20 seconds, not from, boost management and stuff like that, but just from, I regularly miss 1 or 2 shifts per run for a bunch of reasons. I'm a lazy shifter, is the biggest one. But if I can eliminate that, and that's often one of the things I'm working on a weekend, is no missed shifts this run. Each missed shift costs me, 1 to 5 seconds, right? Depending on where it happens on the course, and, whether it's at the start of a straightaway or something like that, right? Like, so yeah, sequentials are huge from that aspect. And yes,
that's the
they
lure.
would make my car faster, but still the biggest, and I'm going to talk myself into a paradox here too, still the biggest hang up on speed for me is my own consistency. So on the one hand, it's on me to fix me, and that's the most low-hanging fruit for myself in terms of improving my car. But then also a sequential helps me improve me in terms of that consistency as well. And it runs into like this, I call it a paradox, but really it's kind of a feedback loop of, stuff like that, where fortunately I have a budget where I just can't afford it.
Yeah,
so
but that's actually the perfect example of this topic, which is that's the want. I think there's a lot more people, because like other sequential options have popped up. There's now, instead of it being $25,000 to $20,000, now it's like 12 to 15 to put in a sequential, which doesn't sound like a huge jump.
That's it.
But it's like it's almost a 50% reduction in what it was, say, 5 or 7 years ago. So it's brought the cost down, that there's some people that have made the jump. They've put the sequential in.
Yeah.
But it's like that's where the budget comes into discussion, is like, okay, well, one, is that really the best way to spend those funds? I mean, even if that is the fastest way to gain 10, 15, 20 seconds in an event, is that the best way to spend this very large chunk of funds to gain that time? Or do you need to go and do more testing? Would it be better to spend even half that much money and do testing and get more seat time, do more shakedown events, more track days? And a lot of times, like I said, Tasso, I mean, if you know that there's still consistency issues, it's going to be way better to keep the car simple, to keep your consumables costs down and fix those consistency issues, versus like putting all the money together, making one lump sum investment, and putting this much more complicated and expensive piece in the car that when it works right is going to make you a lot faster, but it's also going to help you invent some new swear words if it goes wrong.
Well, and so I think what we're settling on here, after an hour of talking about budgets, is really the place that you should be focusing your money is on cryptocurrencies.
It all comes back to crypto. There it is.
If we were just rich, it wouldn't be a problem.
So, I was trying to make sure that we didn't talk about crypto this year or this episode, but blew it, Tasso.
No. Life is crypto. Crypto is life.
Oh my gosh.
No.
Well, no. Yeah,
no,
this is it, but this is the unfun thing to think about sometimes, is like, well, you look at your bank account and then you look at, what it's going to cost to do your bill. And I'm like, well, these two things don't match, like that. It's not a fun place to be in, but it's like, that's where a lot of us are. Like you said, I haven't done a lot of racing, and you're right, because my bank account is here and like my cost to go racing is like, it's just, it hasn't been in the cards.
Probably the biggest thing to take away, if anybody is still listening after 80 minutes or whatever we've been talking, if the biggest takeaway is to just acknowledge that and just move on. You're never going to have the budget you wish you had. The people that are beating you don't have the budgets that you think they do.
Right.
And, so don't make excuses. There's always going to be excuses. It's something,
well, it
drives me nuts, right? People tell me all the time, oh, I wish I had the money that you have to put into your car. And I don't have that. If I had $1 for every time someone said that to me, I'd have half as much money as they thought I had.
Right.
So it's not that. I'm telling you that it's not. The first way to lose at racing is to start making excuses before you even get there for why you should have gone faster, or why if only then I could statements. So don't do the if only then I could statements. Just go get out there and do it.
Or it must be nice statements.
Yeah, right.
It must be nice to have that kind of money, or it must be nice to be able to afford a sequential. And honestly, I mean, all of us are in the same boat. I mean, how I don't go to the grocery store sometimes just so I can afford to go to the track for that weekend. And is ramen noodles, in order to afford to actually get there. And I mean, it's all home built, and I bought my first piece of carbon fiber ever, and it's because I had an extra $500. And I don't know, is it worth it? Probably not, but
it is. It's worth it.
Maybe.
I mean, I see it making
aero
you smile.
parts, so it's going to be worth it.
Oh, I see it making you smile. So then it's there. But
it's actual functional aero. So yeah.
It's all about sacrifices, right? I mean, you can see my partially remodeled house here.
There you go.
Because
I'm glad you pointed that out. I mistakenly thought that was for weight savings. So
no, okay, it's for aero.
Okay.
So no, but it's there's always something, and the point is don't get caught up in someone else's story for why you aren't successful.
True.
Just go out there, make your budget, and then make it successful.
And the other rider I would put on that, and that's kind of the point that I was hoping we would get to with this whole conversation, is budget is always going to be a limitation. As long as you can acknowledge that limitation and realize that you have to learn to work within that limitation, then you're probably going to be successful. But if you don't acknowledge the limitation and you just like, budget be damned, I've got credit cards, let's burn this thing. You're burning your candle at both ends and in the middle, and it's going to run out at some point. So it's like it's making those hard choices and working within that budgetary limitations, and then spending that budget that you have as wisely as possible. That's what's going to keep you allow you to make more events, allow you to continue developing the car, and also hopefully have as much fun as possible. Versus getting into a situation where everything is run out. And then like the frustration sets in, and all of a sudden, like it's just that can be the end.
That last $1,000 that pushes you into a really unhealthy hobby life balance is probably not going to make a difference for your race season, but it will make a difference in your life balance. So,
like actual groceries.
Yeah, you got to eat.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Maslow's hierarchy stuff still matters. Yep. Budget for that too.
Yep, absolutely. Well, that I think is as good a place to end this episode as any. And for anybody that's stuck around to the end, hopefully this was helpful. And thanks for listening to us talk about the most exciting thing ever, budget. But it's one of those things like, if you're going to go out there and compete, if you're going to try and put together a season, it's easier. Hopefully this is helpful because it's easier to kind of have this perspective and kind of be thinking about these things going in versus get surprised by them in the middle or towards the end and get put into a sticky situation. So perfect. Well, thanks everybody for making the time and sitting down and chat with us. And as always, until next time, stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning. Thanks everyone for tuning in to the Flatirons Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. Once again, we'd like to let you know that your support is what makes this show possible. Be sure to check out our online store at flatirons.com for any of your aftermarket or OEM Subaru parts needs. And as always, stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning.